There's a hollow in the frozen ground. At first light, the exact shape of a man who built his shelter right. His fire banked down clean. His roof held. The wind never found him. And he's dead. What killed him cost nothing to fix and 20 minutes to build, and the old hands knew it. But most men heading into cold country today have never been told. My name is Cole Hartwell. I've spent better than 50 years in the backcountry of northwest Montana. 19 of those wintered alone in country where the nearest paved road was 40 miles south, and the nearest help was wherever you hoped someone would notice you were missing. I've earned my living off that land since 1987, trapping, guiding, pulling people out of trouble. The thing that kills men in cold shelter isn't spectacular. It works slow and quiet, and it works best on the careful men who built something they were proud of and then laid down in it and never got up. That's the shelter myth this video is about. And I told you at the start there's no money in teaching this. I'll come back to that before we're through and explain exactly what I mean. Now, here's the part most folks get wrong. You've been taught that shelter means something over your head. Walls, roof, wind block. Get into something, get out of the open, get protected. And that's not wrong. Getting out of the wind and the wet is real, and it matters. But it's only half the work, and it's the half that everyone learns first, and the half that gets all the attention. The other half, the half that gets skipped, is the half that buries people. The ground beneath you pulls heat out of your body, not slowly, not gently. Cold earth isn't just cold air sitting a little lower. It conducts heat away from your body at a rate that cold air above you can't come close to matching. You lie on frozen ground and the heat runs out of you the way water runs out of a cracked pot, steady and constant and gone before you notice it going. Here's what nobody explains clearly enough. When you lie down on cold ground, whatever you've got between you and that ground, your coat, your blanket, your sleeping bag gets crushed flat under your body weight. The insulation that was keeping you warm when it had air pockets in it stops working as soon as you press it flat. Your own weight squeezes every bit of warm air out of the material. So you're lying there thinking the blanket is doing its job, and beneath your back and hips and legs, between the fabric and the frozen earth, there's nothing. No trapped air. No warmth. Just your body heat running straight into the cold ground, hour by hour, all night long. Cold air above you pulls heat out slowly, mostly from your exposed face and the parts of you that aren't covered. Cold ground beneath you pulls it constantly, from full contact, from every inch of your back and hips and thighs pressing into it. The ground wins. It always wins. And the man who doesn't know that will wake up in a shelter that did its job perfectly and still be closer to dead than when he went to sleep. Stay with me, because this changes what you have to build. The man in that hollow didn't die because the storm found a gap in his walls. The storm never got in at all. He built too well for that. He died because he lay on bare ground or close to it. And 8 hours of that slow, steady heat loss pulled his body temperature down past the point where he could think straight, and then past the point where he could shiver hard enough to matter, and then past the point where any of it mattered. It was not the careless men who died this way. I want you to hear that plainly. Not the ones who cut corners or built fast and sloppy by what I've seen and what the accounts say. The ones who died in their shelters in hard cold were most often the careful ones. The men who did every last thing they'd been told to do and did it well. Built something solid, walls that held, a roof that didn't leak, fire banked right, and then they lay on the cold ground inside that good shelter. And the ground did what ground does. The careless man who piled 2 feet of branches under himself and threw up a leaky lean-to walked out cold and grumbling in the morning. The careful man who slept on nothing didn't walk out at all. That ought to sit wrong with you. It still sits wrong with me after all the years I've had to think about it. And that's the first way a shelter kills you. There's a second way. It's quieter. There is a ring of coals at the mouth of a snowed-in lean-to. still ticking with heat in the gray light of morning, cost the man nothing to make. Pulled in close against the cold, free warmth on the worst night of the year. And that free warmth, the heat, a man raked in tight to keep his blood moving through the long dark, stopped his breath before the sun ever cleared the ridge. Not the smoke, not the flames. He never coughed. His eyes never stung. He went to sleep warm and comfortable and didn't wake up. And the reason has nothing to do with fire and everything to do with air. Any fire burning inside an enclosed space consumes the oxygen in that space and replaces it with carbon monoxide. You can't smell that gas. It has no color. You can't feel it. What it does is replace the breathable air around you, breath by breath, quiet as snow coming down, until there's none of the good air left. A man sleeping in a sealed shelter with coals burning inside it doesn't feel it happening. He just stops. This isn't a new problem, and it isn't a rare one. Carbon monoxide poisoning is the most common cause of accidental unintentional poisoning death in the United States, and it kills most of its people in winter, in enclosed spaces, when people are trying to stay warm. It kills men in ice fishing shelters. It kills men in tents with propane heaters. It killed men in camps 200 years ago when they pulled their fire in too tight and sealed out the cold without knowing they were sealing out the air with it. The old hands built open shelters, and that wasn't an accident. The open front lean-to, back to the wind, mouth facing the fire, is a design that solved this problem before anyone had a name for the gas that causes it. Heat from the fire comes in. The CO and moisture go out through the open front with the airflow. It doesn't try to trap everything. It lets the bad air leave. Snow seals shelters overnight. A lean-to that had airflow when you went to sleep can be packed shut by 3 in the morning. Any shelter you seal tight needs a vent hole at the highest point. Put in before you light any fire inside it. Push a stick through the wall at the peak. Mark it. Find it before you close your eyes and check it anytime you wake in the night. If snow packs the hole, clear it. A vent at the highest point works because CO is lighter than air and it rises. A vent at the ground level does almost nothing for that reason. High point, vent hole, every time. Let me tell you what the men who survived actually built, and I want you to picture doing it yourself. The mountain men who trapped these ranges in the old fur trade days didn't have the gear that gets sold in stores today. They had a blanket, a knife, and what the land gave them, and the accounts say a man could run a trap line in this country for years on that if he knew how to use what was there. And what they built first wasn't a roof. It was a floor. The old accounts call the ground layer an epishemore, a piece of blanket or robe spread flat before anything else went up, before the walls, before the roof, before the fire was lit. The floor first, every time. Because the men who trapped these mountains for a living knew what most survival books still manage to skip. It's better to have more under you than on top of you. Always. My grandfather Amos taught me that as a boy, the first winter I went out with him. Pete Dumont, the old Métis trapper who finished my education after Amos died, lived by it the way he lived by everything he carried. Not because someone had told him the science. Because the country had taught it to him through experience. You don't get more than one chance to have. The fix costs nothing. The land makes the materials every season. 20 minutes of work. That's what stands between the man in the hollow and the man who walks out. Here is exactly how to do it, and I'll give you the why under every step. Because a rule you don't understand is a rule you'll skip when you're cold and tired and your hands aren't working right. First, read the ground before you set up. Crouch down and feel the earth where you plan to sleep. Cold, damp ground pulls harder than cold, dry ground. If one spot is lower, wetter, or closer to running water than another, move to the drier spot before you do anything else. The 20 minutes of work ahead of you only does its job if you start in the right place. Second, clear the floor down to the driest base you can reach. Get the snow, the wet leaves, the standing water off the sleeping area. You want your insulation resting on as dry a foundation as you can make. Because wet material below your boughs wicks, cold straight through them. And you've built yourself a wet, cold pad instead of a warm, dry one. Third, gather your insulation. Spruce boughs work best because they're springy and hold their air pockets under weight, and they shed water better than most. Fir boughs make the softest bed if you can find them. Pine in a pinch, dry leaves, dry grass, dry bracken fern, dead cattail. Anything the land gives you that's dry and has natural airspace built into it. Now here is where most people quit too soon. And quitting too soon is what kills the work. You need more than you think. Pile what seems like too much, then pile more. You want 2 feet of material stacked up before you test it, because your body weight will compress it down to 1/3 of that height. And you need 6 inches of compressed thickness between yourself and the cold earth to do real work. 4 or 5 inches and you're still losing heat through the bottom. Less than that and you've just built yourself a thin, uncomfortable pad and called it survival. Lay the boughs tips up, the stem toward you, the leafy end pointing away from your head. That isn't tradition or habit. Tips up creates a woven, springy layer that traps air pockets better than boughs laid flat or dumped at random. It works the way a spring mattress works. The structure gives under you rather than packing solid, and the warm air stays in the gaps rather than getting pressed out. Build the bed wider than your body, at least 4 feet, and 7 to 8 feet long. When you shift in sleep, the edge of you comes off the pile, and if the pile is only as wide as your shoulders, your hip drops to cold earth before midnight. Build for where you'll actually be in your sleep, not just where you plan to start. My grandfather Amos showed me this the first time I ever wintered out with him in the high country. I thought it seemed like a lot of work for a sleeping spot. He looked at me the way he looked when a thing didn't need an argument. Then he said, "Boy, the bed is the shelter. The roof is just the courtesy." I didn't fully understand it until I found a man who had skipped the bed and done everything else right. Then I understood it the way you understand a thing that costs you. Bank extra material up both sides of the bed once it's laid, not just beneath you. Up the sides, too, a few handfuls deep on each side. Cold air works by convection, and it finds the gap at the edge of a flat pad. A nest holds temperature better than a mattress does, and the difference is the sides. Before you finish, lie down and check. Can you feel cold ground through the pile? If yes, add more. Can your hip or shoulder press through to something hard and cold? If yes, add more. A sore back from sleeping on a pile that thick is nothing. A core temperature you can't bring back is something else entirely. Now the shelter itself. The lean-to that the old mountain men built wasn't sealed. Open mouth, facing the fire, and that open front wasn't a failure of skill or effort. The trappers who built it knew what they were doing. The design is simple. Back to the wind. The slope of the roof directing snow and rain away from the opening. The mouth open and facing a long fire laid in front. Not a small fire, a long one. A fire built long, 3 to 4 feet from end to end, throws a wide sheet of heat. It heats a man the full length of his body, not just his chest. A small hot pile of flame heats a point in front of you. A long, low fire heats a wall. And a man in an open lean-to, with a good long fire in front of him, and a bough bed beneath him is warmer than a man sealed into a tight shelter, with a small heat source burning up the air he breathes. The open mouth does 2 things. It lets the heat in from the fire, it lets the CO and the moisture out. The design solves both problems that the sealed shelter creates, and it solves them without any equipment, without any gear, with what the land and a knife and an hour of work can build you. If you're building any enclosed shelter, a snow cave, a debris hut, a lean-to with the front sealed against the cold, put a vent hole in the highest point before you bring any heat source inside. Find a peak. Push a stick through. Mark it so you can find and clear it. If snow closes it overnight, check it before you sleep. The test for any enclosed shelter is this. If you can't feel any fresh cold air moving in from somewhere, there's no ventilation. That isn't warmth. That's a box that'll slowly replace the air you breathe while you sleep, and it'll do it quiet enough that you won't feel it going. A leaky shelter with a bow bed and a vent hole beats a tight shelter with neither of those things. The tighter you build without accounting for both problems, the safer you feel and the more danger you're in. That's the exact shape of the myth. It feels like protection. It costs the same as protection. And it isn't protection. Everything on this channel gathered in one place. It's a book on my website. I won't bring it up again. If you want it, it's there. I told you at the start that there's no money in this, and here's exactly what I mean. Walk into any outdoor gear store and look at what they sell for surviving cold. Tents, sleeping bags, bivy sacks, tarps, pads, yes, foam and inflatable. But they get sold as comfort items alongside the sleeping system, not as the primary defense against the primary killer. Every category in that store is designed around what's above and around you. The gear speaks to overhead protection, wind protection, rain protection. That's the sale. A sleeping bag rated to 20 below zero is rated that way on the assumption that you have a sleeping pad beneath you. The tag doesn't explain that. The reason is that your body weight crushes the insulation in that sleeping bag flat on the side touching the ground. And the temperature rating becomes close to meaningless if you're sleeping on bare earth. Most people who buy that bag don't know that when they walk out of the store. The reason that lesson doesn't travel with the gear is simple, not a conspiracy. Something simpler than that. A foam pad costs $8 and lasts 10 years. A pine bough bed costs nothing, and the land makes more every season. No product to sell, no repeat purchase. No margin for anyone. The outdoor industry profits from overhead shelter. The tent, the bag, the tarp, the jacket. And the ground insulation problem has always been solvable with what's already on the ground around you. So the knowledge that traveled was the knowledge attached to something somebody sold. The tent replaced the lean-to. And the tent company doesn't tell you to pile boughs beneath it. The sleeping bag replaced the buffalo robe and the bough bed both. And the sleeping bag company rates it on the assumption that you've got the pad, not the assumption that you know why you need it. Pete Dumont kept himself alive in this country on a knife and a blanket for weeks at a stretch. He taught me the bough bed the way he taught everything else, by doing it rather than explaining it, because a man who's done it enough times doesn't need the explanation. The knowledge he carried came from generations of people who had nothing to buy, and so learned to use everything the land gave them. What they knew was worth more than what the store sells. I'd rather you trust me than be impressed by me, so I'll say it plain. The most expensive sleeping system I've ever found in the backcountry didn't save the man lying in it. A pile of spruce boughs would have. Here are the numbers, because I think you should have them. Avalanches kill roughly 27 Americans in an average year. That number comes from tracking that goes back decades, and it's solid. Avalanche country is real and dangerous, and the gear and the training people do for it are not foolish. That death is dramatic and visible, and it deserves the attention it gets. Hypothermia kills more than 1,000 Americans every year. In 2023, the number was over 1,000. In bad years, it runs close to 1,500. Year after year after year, the same steady count. That's roughly 48 people dying from cold exposure for every one person who dies in an avalanche. Avalanches get the headlines and the gear and the magazine stories. Hypothermia doesn't make good video. It looks like a man lying down, so nobody trains for it the way they train for the dramatic death. And the number stays where it is, year after year. Quiet is the thing that causes it. Most of those deaths happen in conditions that didn't look deadly when they started. Not major blizzards, not remote wilderness where help was never coming. Cold nights, wrong choices, a half-true lesson about what shelter is supposed to do. The storm gets the credit. The storm always gets the credit. The storm is the loud thing, and the loud thing is almost never the thing that kills you out here. It's the quiet thing, the ground beneath you pulling heat for 8 hours. The gas from the coals filling the space breath by breath. That's what puts men in the ground. And the lesson that could stop it is free, and it's old, and the land hasn't run out of the materials to build it. Before we close, in any cold emergency, ground insulation is the first thing you build after you've stopped being wet. If you're wet, get dry first. If you're dry, build the floor before you build the roof. That's the order. Here is what to do with this. 1. Before you pick a campsite, feel the ground. Find the driest spot in the area you have available. Cold, damp earth pulls harder. You get to choose before you commit to it. 2. Gather floor insulation first before anything goes overhead. Spruce or fir boughs first choice. Dry leaves or dry grass if that's what's there. Pile them 2 feet high on the footprint where you'll sleep. 4 feet wide, 7 to 8 feet long. Lie on the pile and test it. If you feel cold ground through it, add more. 3. Lay the boughs tips up in overlapping layers. Bank material up both sides of the sleeping area. Build a nest, not a pad. 4. If you're building any enclosed shelter, put a vent hole at the highest point before you bring any heat inside. Mark it with a stick. Check it before you sleep and when you wake in the night. 5. If you're building a lean-to, face the mouth toward a long fire. Long, not tall. 3 to 4 feet of fire length throws a wide wall of heat and keeps the open mouth working the way it's supposed to work. 6. Test before you sleep. Feel for cold through the bough bed. Feel for fresh air at the vent. If either one fails, fix it before you close your eyes. No gear to buy. No cost. 20 minutes. And what the land around you already has. Tell me down in the comments if you've slept in cold ground and felt it working on you. Or if you got the floor right and made it through in a way you didn't expect. Every one of those stories teaches the rest of us something worth knowing. Next time there's a danger in the cold, the old hands treat it as a first-day lesson, and most modern guides don't mention it all. I'll lay it out plain. Until then, build the floor first, then build the roof.